Does anyone want to ask anything or make any comments today? I was going to say some faces are smiling, and others are looking quite kind of. And Mark is probably eating, but we can't see because he's turned his camera off. Nobody wants to to ask anything or clarify anything or say anything. It will make editing the question and answer session very quick. Okay. Anybody like me to know that Zoom is still working?
Yes, still working.
Yeah, still working. Thank you for that. Thank you, Colin. Good. Well, my hope is it was a.
You packed a lot in there.
We did pack a lot in. I was very conscious of that. Yeah. Yeah.
Be a good rewatch.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, I think. I mean, it's one of those things where because when it came to the kind of this Easter narrative, was one of the first things I started to do more regularly. I not just doing it once, but kind of coming back and every year I do it. You'd start seeing new things, and it kind of just in many ways it highlights that thing of you can think you know a passage, but you come back year after year, and every year you spot things that you haven't seen before. So.
My one thought on that is I've always found this quite mysterious, this little part of scripture. And I've become a lot more accepting of mystery in my Christian belief as I've got older and less concerned about it. And I just wonder, this verse has always seemed to me one of those, because it is a little bit mysterious and needs to be interpreted, that it's an invitation for people to interpret it however they want. So whatever their slant is on Christianity or whatever they're trying to impose, they will latch it onto this little story, whether it's trying to scare people into doing something or it's something to do with judgment or whatever. So just a more general comment, I think, about that whole thing of
I think so I think because I actually think it's right at the heart of, which is useful for us as we get more of an apprehension of it. It aids us in terms of how we are good. If I use the word evangelism to mean the salting and lighting that transforms and changes people, because actually in the worst extremes of evangelicalism, and I say that carefully because I consider myself an evangelical. I believe in the good news, and I believe in that in Scripture, and I that has a certain understanding of the word of authority and inspiration. Now that may vary from some other evangelicals who mean those same words in slightly different ways, but I do share those things. So I'm not being critical of that position. What I'm saying is that kind of extreme, which is all about that has no mystery in it, misses the way I actually think the gospel works in people. And I think you right the way through the Bible, you get things where God has wrapped his story in something that you have to look through to see the truth of. You see, we have so sanitized the cross, we don't realize how disgusting it was. Like when Paul says it's foolishness to the Greeks and it's anathema to the Jews. It's and yet that was how when I heard the gospel. I can remember. As a very young teenager, probably about 13, I remember responding to the gospel. We're speaker at Spring Harvest. I went along to the youth program, and and it was like my head was saying that everything they said just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's all kind of substitutionary and this, that, and I don't get that. But I know there's something true here. And so then you start to crash into a conflict between the head and the heart. But actually, as you walk it through, you start to get the wisdom that sees it, if that makes sense. And so Greg Boyd talks about that. The huge chunks of the Old Testament are like that magic eye thing, where you look at them and you see one layer, and you think, don't like that. Sounds like genocide. Sounds like, this sounds like that. I think I noticed the other day that the team that have made the Chosen, the TV series, are making a film called The Only Son, which is about Abraham offering Isaac, and that's a prime example of something that in Sunday school we get to make. Oh, isn't that great? God proved his faith. And we don't realize how awful it is, the idea that God would say to someone, if you really want to show you love me, go and kill your own kid. We miss the challenge because we've got so inoculated to it. But the truth of the matter is, the way in one sense the gospel and scripture, as it supports that story and tells us that story, works, is because there's something in it that is profoundly beautiful, profoundly true, but it creates an equal tension against, to make us come into it carefully and slowly, and to come in with awe, if you like, and reverence. And so if I go back to my criticism of doing the kind of the evangelical thing into it's no problem, but that just fits like this. Well, just do it that way. Just do it that way. The trouble is we never then get that kind of the things that come out of the tension or the pressure, if I can put it that way. And yet that, as you kind of, as you push through on that and say, I'm going to stick with this. And on a personal level, I'd say, I took on an attitude quite early on because of having the wonderful experience of getting healed and therefore not dying. There were lots of things that I've had problems with, but I knew that Jesus had done something really good for me, and this was the testimony of him. So I'm going to have to work through this. If that makes sense? So I came to a place where I'd say, right, I'm not going to worry about it, but I'm not going to not worry about it because it doesn't matter. If I'm going to ask you, Lord, to either change who I am so I can see it more clearly, or to help me see it in a better way. But I won't allow the fact I can't see it like that at the moment to make me lose faith and walk away. If that makes sense. And I personally found it quite useful. I'm not saying it's a perfect approach. So I've I don't kind of get cynical when I find a verse I find difficult. I just think at some point I'll be transformed enough I can see it, or at some point I will suddenly realise that it wasn't saying what I thought it said, because actually because you've studied more and you learn more and you go and read things and different translations, you read it now in 5 different translations, you realise it doesn't quite mean what you thought it did the first time. So either I've changed or I've seen something different. That process is slowish, but in the mix of that, I won't try and be too trivial about it. So when someone says I have real problems with this, okay, that's fine. Let's understand that. But actually, why are you even here if you've got problems with it? Well, because there's something in you that sort of knows that there's something going on here. Anyway, that's my personal take on what you're saying there, Mark. Is that it's almost part of the genius of the way Scripture works. That it doesn't try to be too user friendly. It tries to what it does more is it's such a remarkable story, you sort of want to understand it deeper. It's not that there aren't bits in it you don't like or you find offensive, because if there weren't bits like that, then obviously we'd already have the mind of Christ, so we wouldn't need Scripture. So if it doesn't challenge anything in me or whatever. So I think you're speaking, Mark, but we can't hear you.
Sorry, just realized I was on mute there. With my youngest daughter, she's been asking me questions lately, and it all comes out of this revolting religious education that they do at school, which is just so way off. But the interesting thing is that because it's so poor, there's obviously something in her that's realizing that this can't quite be right. So she's asking me the questions. And it's presented the most incredible opportunity to actually just present the good news of the gospel.
Yeah.
When she's like, well, what about this and what about that? And the other day she even said to me, she's 14 or 15 and wanted to know, she wonders sometimes whether she'll go to heaven because she's not doing enough.
Yeah.
And things like this, which is coming out of this RE, which they're doing at school.
Yeah.
And so I'm able to just present this good news, but I think these poor interpretations are all to do with this sort of, maybe it's a Western sort of scientific approach to religion, where we just want to have an answer for everything.
Yeah.
So you tack even the most bondage-inducing idea onto a scripture because it answers the question, but it doesn't. It then it doesn't set anybody free from anything.
No, and I think one of the things, there are a couple of things you triggered thought-wise, Mark, as you raise it. But I don't know if everyone noticed during the week. I'm probably the actor who's in the American version of The Office tweeted. There's a new television program on one of the streaming services, which is a kind of an apocalyptic horror story, which has got cannibals in it. And they made the worst one, the Christian, of course. And so he kind of just said, he basically just tweeted to say how lazy and pointless this is, and it doesn't. Now, he's not a Christian. He's just commenting in, saying what a lazy trope this is, that every time someone starts to quote the Bible, they're going to be the worst character, because that's all that goes on there. And so there is something whereby there is something in the spirit of the West that has rejected what's gone before, and now has to, because it's been rejected, as is always the way, you have to make it the worst. But then the flip side, I was going to say, of all of that is the little argument that was made by, I saw in an interview with Tom Holland, where he talks about that there are criticisms made of the Bible because a particular idea we think is important today is not there. But actually, when you look at it, lots of the ideas that we now think are important came out of people who discussed the Bible together, and it emerged as a response to the culture of them discussing that context. So he highlighted that by saying that in his counting, something like 6 times an argument against slavery outright as an institution have emerged. There's no verse in the Bible that says you should never have slaves and it's an evil institution. But that idea has emerged 6 times, and it's always been in a Christian context, and it's normally been in the Western Christian context. But then the first groups that adopt it en masse tend to be the Eastern and Southern, Eastern and Coptic churches have adopted it. It's never emerged in any other culture. So I just think that when you see that, you understand it's something not so much in the always hanging off precise words, as valuable as they can sometimes be in my own meditation when God picks one up and speaks it to me. It's often in the meaning and the discussion as we talk about it. Somehow it has an impact in the human psychology to start seeing truth that is reflective and meaningful to them in their situation. And that's often, for me, is the power of what makes Scripture, is it has the ability to do that. Not so much that it contains a checklist of exactly, what you should do in every moment of every day, in every culture, and in every situation. It somehow has that ability to help us see those things with the right light. But like you, Mark, we had a bunch of kids coming through, at the King's Church, and we did a little presentation. And when you say what do you expect to see, what do you think Christians are like, the level that they're being taught at, sorry if any of the teachers who are now watching this, is so trivially simple. It's but in a weird way it kind of almost inoculates them, because they think they know what it is, because they did a course at school. And we learned that in Islam, if you do this and this, you go to hell. In Christianity, if you do this and this, you go to hell. In Buddhism, nobody goes to hell, but it's that kind of level is not. Anyway, don't get me off on it.
Yeah, it really is. It's dire, but like I say, the only value in it is that it's actually made my kids come and ask me, because and they come and ask with the sense that we've been told this, but I'm sure this can't be right.
Yeah, no,
and that's the way they sort of present it to me, and so it's a wonderful opportunity to actually just present. And very few people do present the good news of the gospel, even Christians. No. Very few know how to express that. But it's been a great opportunity for me.
The big hope in many ways is, I think, the majority, one of the interesting things that came out of the research, I think I've referred to a couple of times, done several times now. So on what the general public believe about God and so on. But one of the things that's interesting is when you look at what they think of Christians is incredibly positive. When you ask them what they think of church, it's incredibly negative. So the fact that the same person holds that tension, actually, if we understand how to address that correctly, there is a good conversational opportunity in it, which is really what you're finding with your girls. Is they're forced to know you because you're their dad, and they know you're not quite like that, even though this is how they're hearing it. So they have that conversation. And I think if you can highlight, if you can illustrate in folks, and that issue, I remember saw a journalist once commenting on it. I think it was like it was just on a copy in a version of EastEnders or something where there were Christians on that saying why is it, which is the same as Rainn Wilson, the guy off The Office, was saying about this film, the same thing, which is why is it that they paint Christians like this? Because that's not like the Christians I've actually ever met. That was what they were saying. And I'm thinking, actually, there are an awful lot of people who realise that actually the Christians they've met, they actually they see something kind of that, to use the kind of the secular word, they kind of feel centered in life. They seem to have purpose in life. They have things, they seem to genuinely give them good advice, not just kind of polemic. All of those things, that's what they tend to have experienced, but they have a caricature in their head painted very often by the media, which they associate therefore with Christian church. And if I can be gracious to those who represent the structure, because I think there's a problem, which is more of a coaching issue, and lots of Christians fall into the same trap, which is we tend to personify institutions, but institutions aren't people. So we tend to decide, we treat the government as if it's an immoral person, where it's not. It's actually doing something totally different. It's having to kind of create rules and whatever. And I think it's very similar. The understanding of the move from Old to New Testament is if you just want a set of rules, they will always be imperfect and there'll always be things you can criticize them for. But if you want rules, and actually you need rules, because without the rules you can't build a community and a culture, here's some ones that will work pretty well for you. But that's not the summation of what it means to really be moral. So and I think, as I say, so the problem is we might hear a pronouncement in isolation from some vicar somewhere because he's been asked a question to say something on this or that, and we go, well, that's rather shallow, that's rather trivial. But now we're treating that kind of institutional image or that doctrine or that whatever as if it's a person who can respond in a moral way, which it can't. It's just trying to sum things up. Sorry, I'm about to take far too long on this because we're already past. I'll give I've often used that little example, which you take as a statement. In the UK it's illegal for children to drink. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, a real person can unpack that, but if it's just there as a statement, it kind of, you can say that's an illogical thing. Kids would die of thirst if you didn't allow them to drink. What age does someone become a child to an adult? There's a whole host of stuff that requires a response, which requires a personality in it. But when you're having to kind of do things at broad level, inevitably you have to be rather broad brushstroke. And so what I'm saying is we need to be gracious to those who have to stand in that position, to recognise that's how they do it. And we want to try and train people to understand, not to solidify statements that are made, which are tiny moments of a real personality. Sorry, hopefully that sort of fits the question you asked. I think I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, Mark. But yeah. Anyway, well, I want to be conscious of the time that we've used that hour now fully again. So, anyone would like to make any last comment or statement? Joe looks like you're about to. Nope. No. Okay, well let's finish there then. We'll probably get another one in before Easter, and we'll maybe take a break for a couple of weeks over Easter. But we'll let you know via email how it was all going. So great to see everyone.
Thanks so much, Christian.
Yeah, I'll see you next week then. So
thank you. Yeah.
God bless you guys. Bye.
Thanks, Kristen.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.